what Bitcoin savings and trust actually was and what the SEC here is actually accusing them, forgive me, federal prosecutors in New York are accusing them of doing.
So there are a number of different businesses that are using Bitcoin to do business, but they haven't properly filed, for example, with the SEC if they're selling shares. The securities and trust issue.
Selling shares of Bitcoin? Or selling shares of their company?
Selling shares in their company,
okay.
or selling a number of different sort of Bitcoin-related currencies in order to fund company plans. Now, this savings and trust issue appears to be a straight-up Ponzi scheme issue, right?
So what was going on?
So it's like a Ponzi scheme would be in dollars or a Ponzi scheme in euros. This guy happened to be using Bitcoin.
So he was saying, okay, I'll sell you some Bitcoin.
No. It was like a bank. He was representing himself as a bank, and so you're saying, okay, I'll keep my 100 Bitcoin with you. You know, you'll keep your 1,000 Bitcoin with him. Trish, you'll put your 1,000 Bitcoin with him, and he's using the money for other stuff, even though you think he's holding it. A stupid
thing to do, Jeffrey.
It is a stupid thing to do. In fact, according to allegations that the SEC has made, he would tell people, I'm going to take your Bitcoin, I'm going to engage in virtual currency arbitrage. But in fact, they allege that he took the money and spent it on his rent and spent it on car expenses, spent it on casinos. So in some ways, it's your classic
Bernie Madoff, just like Bernie Madoff, except for instead of using dollars, he was using Bitcoin.
Yeah, but he wasn't actually registering any of this properly as well. I mean,
now there are a number of other cases that involve non-registered IPOs or people starting Bitcoin mutual funds, but they're not registering the documents with the SEC. See, there's a whole bunch of these criminal cases that involve Bitcoin or are somehow related to Bitcoin, but it could just as easily be done with dollars or euros, right. So it's not like Bitcoin is the key.
No, but what's interesting is that this seems to attract an interesting crowd. On the one hand, you've got the venture capitalists and pretty legit, upstanding folks that really want to make this work and see this as a technology that could really fuel the future. On the other hand, you have, for better or for worse, sort of an anarchist movement that's behind this that kind of seems to be like, I just don't care about the law. I don't have to play by the rules. And it's getting the overall currency, I think, tarnished with some bad reputation.
I think that's right. You're seeing a real movement away from the kind of anarchist background that you see in some of the rhetoric of very early investors in the Bitcoin space. And as more hedge funds have moved in and more money has moved in, they've required that the companies move away from that. And because of that, because people aren't willing to invest money in a company that has a motto of anarchism, you're seeing a lot more interest in complying with new regulations that are coming out as part of their business model.
Now, by
the way, I think it only tarnishes the reputation of the currency if you don't believe in total freedom, if you're not a libertarian, if you don't believe in this anarchist movement. There are a lot of people who think that that's the right way to go, that aren't in favor of big brother, uber regulation, huge government.
Right, but then at some point it starts to cross the line where it's, on the one hand, yes, you can be a libertarian that's for a lack of sort of regulation overseeing this and maybe sort of anti-Fed, but then this tends to cross. I mean, let's talk about Darkcoin or Dark Wallet, which is out there. A lot of these Bitcoin alternatives gaining popularity by drug dealers. And the thinking behind them is that they push the anonymity of Bitcoin even further. Could we be in an environment where you could be entirely anonymous on a cash-type basis online with some of these new versions of the currency?
Absolutely. I mean, the nature of the technology is that there is a trail of the transactions that are done, but at the end of the day, there is a higher amount of anonymity, largely because the way that currency gets into these networks doesn't go through a bank. It often can go straight from cash into a virtual currency, sometimes outside the United States, and that allows for certain types of anonymous transactions that you can't do through the banking system.
So it's important to point out, Darkcoin is trying to make a more anonymous Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It'll never be as anonymous as dollars, right? Using cash is the most anonymous thing you can possibly do, other than just simply not using any currency at all.
Yeah, and
dollars are the most anonymous transaction, but it's more difficult to be anonymous when you're doing stuff online, and that's what Darkcoin is trying to.
If I were suddenly to just say, I'm just going to live on cash for the rest of the month, I'm going to use cash only, I could do that. What's weird about the environment we now live in is that you can't, you can't do that online, right? I mean, is this in some ways going back to what we originally all did? And isn't that okay?
Point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there have actually been a few interesting articles written about people that have tried to survive entirely on virtual currency, Bitcoin, and it is possible, but it does limit your flexibility.
I've done it, for example, for 2 weeks. There were a lot of difficulties. I couldn't pay my mortgage, for example, with Bitcoin. Buying
but, you
gasoline.
couldn't do this with cash either. I guess that's the tough thing. I mean, if you think about 50 years ago, credit cards weren't anywhere near as popular as they are today. You went out to dinner, you paid cash for it.
Yep.
Nowadays, you go down to Starbucks, you don't even need a receipt. They just swipe your card, there you go, you walk out with your coffee. And everything is a transaction that can be
traced. That's what Darkcoin is trying to provide. It's trying to allow you an anonymity, the kind of anonymity you would have if you just used cash, just dollars. Except for you're doing these transactions online. So, of course, people who gravitate towards them are going to be, like you say, drug dealers. There's a number of dark websites that people use, like Nucleus, for example, or Diabolus, where mostly they're selling weed and like LSD, and people are increasingly using Darkcoin to make those transactions.
The flip side of that is, maybe you're taking the drug issue off the streets and moving it online.
Well, I think
out of the hands of gangs, and
a lot of people would be against the prohibition of drugs, but right now they're still illegal in most drugs in most states, unless you can get a doctor to write you a prescription or you're in Colorado. So the idea though is, if you want drugs in a state where they're illegal still, or you want illegal drugs, how do you get them online? And Darkcoin is one of the answers that people have come up with. What I'm confused about is how you can still send them through the mail, right?
Yeah, one of the more damaging pieces of information in the prosecution against Silk Road was if you went to its FAQ, its frequently asked questions section, it had instructions on how to mail different forms of narcotics through the U.S. mails and the UPS. So that was devastating evidence against them, but it shows how you can get away with it.
I think